This program contains subject matter related to mental health and suicide. If you or anyone you know is in crisis, call or text 988 for free, 24/7, to reach the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
You're not alone, and there are things that you can do. That is at the center of so much of what we're talking about, and that is at the center of the conversations that friends, family, clinicians can all have with someone who's in a tough place.
Yeah, and it just opens the door. When we're talking about how you can prevent suicide, it's having that conversation, letting someone know just because they're talking about it together in a collaborative way, we can work on this and we can make a decision. Our main thing is talk saves lives. Hi, and welcome to Ask Dr. Jill, a podcast by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, where we consider real mental health questions with answers based on the latest scientific research. I'm Dr. Jill Harkavy-Friedman, AFSP's Senior Vice President of Research. My guest today is Chris Munden, AFSP's Senior Manager of Research and Dissemination. You may recognize Chris from AFSP's TikTok, where he shares the science behind the mental health challenges we all deal with, like stress, grief, or fear, while also providing advice on how to care for ourselves and each other. Today, we're going to address a big question. Can suicide actually be prevented? We'll also explore the history of suicide prevention and the latest research on it. Chris, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Jill. It's an honor to be here.
So, Chris, I want to ask you a question. I'm sure you have a few for me, but you came here as an extern 6 years ago. What keeps you here?
Wow. Well, getting to work with you for one. Hi, Jill. But there's a million answers I could have for this. The people here, we work with incredible people. Our mission is so meaningful. My exact role, I consider it a dream job. But probably more than any of those things, I think what's kept me here over the last 6 years and keeps me here every day and inspires me every day is the hope and the potential for helping that's attached to what we do, You know as well as I do that with the specific mission that we serve, and with it being mandated by the efforts of countless volunteers who support us and raise the funds for us to actually do what we do, there is such potential to save life that if we communicate in the right way, if we, extend a hand in the right way, and we can really help keep people here.
Well, in fact, AFSP was started by researchers and people who lost someone to suicide. But your role here as a senior manager of grants and dissemination has really changed the conversation, because now we actually have a lot of research. We understand suicide and suicide prevention better, and we have things we can do to prevent suicide.
Yeah, and so much of what we're doing now with dissemination is kind of every time we translate research, it becomes more preventable. That's research in action. It's giving research legs to actually become hope and get into people's actual lives.
Yeah, exactly. So since I've been in the field for 40 years and you're relatively new, do you have any questions?
Well, that's a big question. First, I would start with what led you into suicide prevention.
That's an interesting question because it was complete serendipity. It was not something that I intended to do. I started my first job, and it was in late 1984, and the chairperson wanted both to study suicide and to develop an adolescent suicide clinic. And for the 3 years before, it reminded me of a wedding I went to where the bride lined up all the women and turned around and threw the bouquet, and we all stepped back a step. Nobody would touch it. Nobody would do it. I was a young PhD, and so I was like, I'll do it. And honestly, that's how I got into it. And I'm so grateful because it's a true passion of mine. And at the time, maybe there were like 10 of us researching it, if that many. Really, very little was known. People were afraid of it. when I started the adolescent depression and suicide program, I was told, you can't put suicide in the title because that'll make people suicidal. And I was like, first of all, not everybody who's suicidal is depressed. And second of all, how will they know where to go? But the idea that you could just use the word suicide and would make people suicidal is absurd. And it's also disrespectful. It's like, oh, so we could just say, don't be suicidal, and then they'll stop. But that's not how it works. It's a very complex behavior, and there's a lot we can do to help prevent it. And the field and everything has changed so much since we started, like us having a conversation here today. So that's how I got into it. But I did find out after my dad died, the family revealed that my great-grandfather died by suicide.
Wow.
Yeah, it was such a secret. And that's the other part. There's no reason for it to be a secret. My dad knew I worked in suicide prevention. He was very proud of it. But it didn't come to light until after he was gone. And we're changing that.
There's still so much you don't speak about it. Yeah,
we're changing that because carrying that, I think about my great aunts and great uncles, carrying that without sharing it, it has to be so painful. It's hard enough when you lose somebody, but to not be able to talk about it because you're ashamed or embarrassed, which really means you don't understand it.
And I think like what we're doing right now is just every conversation you have about suicide can chip away at the resistance to speaking about it and kind of, let a little bit of air out of the balloon.
Exactly.
And it helps just create a culture where, help seeking is more doable and more realistic for people, hearing it more,
Well, it's just like when I was a kid, nobody talked about cancer. It was the C word. It's the same thing, but that doesn't help anybody. The only way we get to save lives with cancer was because we started talking about it, and then we started studying it, and then we found ways to prevent it and to treat it. And it's the same with suicide. Now that we talk about it, people who are struggling can come forward. And like you said, it kind of lets some air out of that pressure to not talk about it. And we have so many things we can do now to help prevent suicide. And I think about it one person, one moment at a time.
Absolutely.
But that's how we got to do it.
Yeah. Related to that, how have you seen just the techniques and strategies of preventing suicide evolve over this, legacy you've had in the field?
So what's really turned out to be important is the same thing we're talking about, which is that it's very important to talk about it. What we've learned is you have to treat the underlying mental health condition, which 90% of people who do die by suicide have an underlying mental health condition, but that's not enough. That you also have to address the suicidal thoughts and behaviors head on. You need to help people manage with it. It's not like a person is either suicidal or not suicidal. It's not a characteristic. It's something that is complicated, complex. There are many factors like having a mental health condition, having a chronic health condition, having a pain condition, genetics, family history, head trauma, early abuse. There's so many factors, and any one factor millions of people have had, and they're not at risk for suicide. So it's kind of like a moving thing. And at a point in time for a person, when they're faced with a social stress or pressure, they may have a suicidal crisis. And if they do, and they have access to lethal means, they could die from it. So the good news is that gives us lots of different ways to intervene to prevent suicide. So we can address the underlying vulnerabilities like chronic pain, having a health condition, family history. If you have a family history, then pay attention, monitor it, get tested, get treatment when you need it, just like breast cancer or any other kind of cancer. We can do something about that. We can also help people learn how to manage or deal with or accept social pressures and stressors. And we can also help limit access to lethal means so that if somebody does have a crisis, they're not likely to act on that. Or if they do, if they don't have access to the lethal means, even if they do something, they won't die from it. And so all of that was unknown when I came into the field in 1989.
Wow.
85, actually.
Yeah. And I mean, it's relative to other fields. It's a young field,
Yeah.
I mean, this movement only really started in the early 80s.
Yeah.
In the lab, at least.
In 1974, the only research on suicide and the brain, for instance, was how the brain was affected when somebody tried to take their life.
Wow.
And yeah, nothing like the brain is involved in decision-making, emotion regulation, responding to stress, none of that.
Mm-hmm.
And the great thing is that because we've learned that and because we have treatments, I mean, we've actually funded a study that shows that when you use dialectical behavior therapy, you can actually change brain function and improve it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how cool is that?
It's unbelievable. And what I'm hearing so much of you mention in terms of it being complex and how that offers many doors for us to walk through, especially for clinicians, I mean, I'm lucky enough because I work with you every day, and we get to ping pong our ideas on suicide prevention at least for an hour a week. But I think for the audience, related to the idea of like, why does suicide happen? Part of why I feel so lucky to be one of the first guests on this show is because, I know what this wealth of knowledge that the audience gets to tap into, and I know about your model of suicide risk and how it's dynamic and always shifting. So I think it would be useful to hear, like, just you explain that model again, and just how does suicide happen?
Yeah. So, and I want to say that the model is for dying by suicide, not for suicide attempts and not for suicidal ideation, because they're really different behaviors. So millions of people, about 14 million people think about suicide. About 1.3 to 6 million actually make a suicide attempt. 90% of them will not die by suicide. And then in 2023, 49,316 people that we know of died by suicide. So you can see, just because you're thinking about it doesn't mean you're at risk for dying by suicide. And that's really important because people start panicking when somebody says, I'm thinking of it. And all that really means is have a conversation, ask them more. And we have some great tools to do that. We have Seize the Awkward. We have Out of Darkness walks. We have, we have so many things that can help people have those conversations. So I don't want people to think that if someone they love or themselves is thinking about it, they're destined to die by suicide. That's absolutely not true. What it does mean is have a conversation. And so the model that Dr. Boutier and I have been working on has, as I mentioned, 3 different factors. There's the underlying risk factors that has things that most of us have experienced at some point, but they don't lead us to die by suicide. But in combination, and when they're activated, they can change your threshold so that if you experience stress, you might end up going to that suicidal thought or behavior place. And if you go to that and you're going to act on it, if you have access to lethal means, you could die. But if you're don't have access to lethal means, even if you do something, you will survive it. But most likely because of your limited thinking and what we call cognitive flexibility, your mind isn't really going to shift gears that fast. So you have these underlying factors, mental health conditions, chronic pain, chronic health conditions, history of trauma, abuse, early loss. You can go to AFSP.org and learn a lot about that. Then if you have this stress that you feel that you can't manage, that's because your brain is losing flexibility. And in that suicidal crisis moment, you don't have access to your usual coping. And so that's why sometimes people say, I'm shocked because they were so popular, they did so many things. It's really shocking that it came out of the blue. And the hard part for us is like, it actually never comes out of the blue. That we don't always know what the signs are. People don't tell us, I'm going to go do this, right? But when you look back, sometimes you can see those risk factors and warning signs. And we're in the mission, I like to say, of turning hindsight into foresight. So we have these underlying characteristics. We have the stressors that feel insurmountable, and then access to lethal means. And that combination, if you don't get through that moment, could lead to someone dying by suicide. But when we talk about if it's preventable, if we can help people through that moment, we could save a life.
And just one important point that I want to mention too is that I've learned so thoroughly here is that brain state, that acute crisis moment, one thing that we lean on so much and that I myself derive so much hope from as a person that's involved in research, but also as, I'm training to become a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
With some of my early clients, just explaining the fact that those moments of crisis, they are temporary. Usually they're short lasting and they pass by. And so most of the battle is just working on getting people through those moments and also securing the environment to make safety an easy choice.
Yeah. And so that's why I have, as a clinician, I love what you talk about, what you're learning about how to have that open conversation with a person or their family members. But also, there's a thing we use that sounds so simple, but it actually helps people get through that moment, and that's called a safety plan. So it's literally a plan for safety. It was developed by Barbara Stanley and Gregory Brown. And it was first developed to help people get through a medication treatment study for suicidal teens. And this was going to help them get through those moments till they could start the medication. But it turned out it actually helped anyway. And it's become very well known, very popular. They're not all the same. There was a lot of scientific effort that went into what are the right components of a safety plan. But for people who can have that crisis, it's literally written down or in an app, so they don't have, in a crisis is not a good time to come up with a plan, right? So it's steps you take. So the first is to figure out, what are your warning signs? How do you know when you're going to that path? Maybe you're not sleeping, maybe you're using substances more, maybe you're yelling at people. What are your warning signs? And they may be things nobody else sees. Then the first step is, what can you do on your own to, block that, to distract yourself so that you don't go down that path? And so first thing I always like to have, because we all do it, is breathing. Just take 4 breaths, in for 4, hold for 4, let it out for 4. And that process, all 3 steps are important, actually just turns the volume down. And that's what we're looking for in a suicidal crisis. But also, some people do exercise. Some people watch happy movies. Some people watch sad movies. Things you can do on your own just to kind of lower the tone. The next step is, who can you distract yourself with? Who could you go for a walk with? Go for a cup of coffee? I like to say go bowling, but apparently not a lot of people go bowling. But whatever it is that you do with people, and you don't even have to tell them. You don't have to tell them that you're stressing out and thinking of taking your life. And then the next level is, who can you talk to that you can actually say, I'm really stressing out, I'm feeling suicidal. Now, both groups of people, you need their phone number and their name, obviously their name. And you need to keep up on that, because it could change. You could have a fight. They could not be that person anymore. But you want it accessible. You don't want to have to start looking through the phone book.
Because in a crisis, you want things to be easy, especially in a crisis state. The brain is looking for the least effort possible. Yeah,
the brain is just thinking, I got to stop this pain. I got to stop this pain. I can't stand it anymore. My family's going to be better off without me. That's where your brain is. So you could literally take out your safety plan and look at it, and then, I could do that. I could do this. So talking to somebody who they know you're going to call them if you're stressed out. And, most of the time you may never use it, but you might have those moments. Then the professionals come in. So your therapist, your psychiatrist, 988, which is the National Suicide Crisis Line. You could text 741-741 to the crisis text line. You might want to contact the Trevor Project for the LGBTQ plus community. We have lots of resources on our website, afsp.org. Those go on the safety plan. And then the last 2 things are limiting access to lethal means. And one thing that people have mixed feelings about, but I think is really important, which is, what are you looking forward to? What keeps you going? And it doesn't have to be a lifetime keeping you going. I mean, I work with someone where it was the coming out of a new video game. You know, I was like, I'll take it.
Yeah.
When it comes out, we'll work on something else. But you're not making a lifetime decision. You're just trying to get through a moment.
Got it.
And then we have these therapies that help you address that suicidal thoughts and behavior.
So through that, I was thinking, just when you were mentioning people they can reach out to, you know, it just reminds me of like, what role can family and friends play in suicide prevention with their loved ones? Oh,
so important. Family and friends, as long as they're not toxic. But, you know, everybody has somebody who's not toxic. And most families are not toxic. Most families are doing their best. They may not know how to help. So the first thing we want to do is educate people about how suicide and mental health conditions work, about what are some things, what we call warning signs, but what are some things you might see that let you know this person is in a different place. They're not their usual self.
Can you name some?
Yeah, maybe really subtle, like maybe they're sleeping an hour less. Maybe they're not getting up on time. Maybe you notice they're drinking a little bit more, or they're falling asleep because they haven't gotten sleep. Insomnia is a big one, by the way. It could be that they're just talking about not wanting to be here, or it could be, I won't have to worry about this soon. Or here's my favorite guitar. I don't need it anymore. It could be withdrawing from people, and it may even be subtle. Like you might not, we're very forgiving, right? Oh, they have a bad teacher, they have a boss isn't going well, and we chalk things up as if it's nothing. So we have to learn to trust our gut and not excuse everything. And we all do that. So, and it could be that they're depressed. It could be that they just don't care. Could be that they're humiliated. Humiliation is a really big one. So it's what they say, what they do, and how they feel. So these are some warning signs, and you may notice them and just chalk it up to something. So we want people to learn to, that's a little different.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that, and this is a tough one, most people who take their lives have said something to someone at some point. The problem is they may have said it a year ago.
And one idea that we can flip there too is just everything you mentioned, and I know from one of our studies as well, is if you can flip those. Like if you are already worried about someone, or something has struck you in a way that could cause some sort of extra, you know, something's up with that person, you can ask about those risk factors. How are you sleeping?
Yeah.
I know you love running. Have you been running lately? Have you been to any shows lately? That type of thing.
Yeah.
All of those risk factors, all of those different signs can be used by friends and family. Yeah,
and you have some great TikToks on that.
Yeah.
I love the one on sleep that you have. So, if you notice something, register it. If you find yourself sort of excusing it away, just pay attention to it. And then the second is how to have conversations to educate people that you're not going to make somebody suicidal, but you could help them feel less suicidal just by talking. No judgment. Just listen. You don't have to have a solution for them. You know. So what I do with my kids is, are you venting, or do you want me to help you problem solve? You know,
very different.
Because we always. I mean, a lot of us, I myself, think I have to solve everybody's problems, but that's not what it's about. Or it's not about saying, "Oh, you shouldn't feel that way." It's about just hearing and even reflecting back. Wow, it sounds like you're really frustrated. It sounds like you are, losing your sense of purpose.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
That's so huge to say, because I think a lot of the resistance people have to initiating that conversation is thinking that they won't have the perfect words.
Yeah.
When, most times the words are not important. Just like in many situations, it's just the symbol of reaching out, the hand extended.
Yeah.
Just, showing someone that you're there for them is enough that can really make a difference.
Yeah, just showing up. Sometimes it's just sitting and watching TV together, even if it's a show you don't like. You're saying, I'll watch it with you because I care about you. It's important to you. I'll do it. And then sometimes the conversation just comes from there. So we want to, first of all, educate people about warning signs, educate them about some of the factors that may lead someone to be at risk. And there are things that you don't normally put together in your mind. Like sometimes let's say somebody in your family died by suicide. It was a long time ago. You don't even think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they failed a test. It can be, you get so used to somebody having a health condition that you forget that it's hard to manage, and it, can slow them down or cause problems. So knowing what some of the underlying factors that we talked about are, knowing how to have that conversation, and then knowing how to help someone get help.
Mm-hmm.
Who can you call? The great thing about 988 is you can call about somebody you care about, right? And they can
just get information.
Yeah, and they can give you ideas about how to get help. Now, we have a great section of our website on resources and places to get clinical care, and it's there's options for different ethnic and cultural groups and general numbers, substance use. And they're national resources. There are also, you probably have some local resources, but these are resources. The sad thing is that maybe a third, really less than, of people who die by suicide are in treatment at the time of their death.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to do more to train clinicians, but we also have to do more to change the negative attitudes about having a mental health condition and getting help. I know a lot of people use the word stigma, but to me, stigma sounds very like, there's nothing you can do about stigma.
Mm-hmm.
But stigma, the definition is really negative attitudes. And there's a lot we can do about attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that gets in the way. We have these events, the Out of the Darkness walks, and I can't tell you how many people never talk to anybody about a loss or their own suicidal behavior, and they just see the sign.
Yeah.
And they don't tell anyone, and they say, I'm going to show up. And they get there, and there's hundreds to thousands of people who know what you're talking about, what you've experienced. And there's nothing to have stigma or negative attitudes about. You are not alone, and there are things you can do. So we have to just be able to talk about it in a safe way.
Yeah.
And there are ways to talk about it that help people, but there are ways that could be harmful. So you'll notice we don't talk about methods.
Mm-hmm.
We don't give details of what happened, because how painful is that for somebody else who lost someone to suicide?
What just struck me now is, because I was thinking it the entire time, just trying to kind of, deduce into these core elements. And what you said, you are not alone, and there are things that you can do. That is at the center of so much of what we're talking about, and that is at the center of the conversations that friends, family, clinicians can all have with someone who's in a tough place.
Yeah, and it just opens the door. And that's, when we're talking about how you can prevent suicide, it's having that conversation, letting someone know, just because they're talking about it together in a collaborative way, we can work on this and we can make a decision. Do you need to go in the hospital? Do you have supports at home? Maybe we should try some medication. We're going to work with this therapy because it's known to help people. So, that's the part that's also so individual. But, our main thing is talk saves lives, because when it's just in your head, you don't know that. They did a really interesting, this is the researcher in me, they did a really interesting study in the military, active duty. And they asked people in the military who weren't depressed, do you have resources if you have depression? And they said, oh, yes, we have a lot of resources. I can go here, I can go there. Then they asked people in the military who were depressed, and they were like, no, there's not really any resources here for me. So that's the thing to remember. When somebody is feeling depressed or not well or using substances, they don't see all the options. They don't feel that they're there. And that's why we can't just wait for somebody to come tell us, because they may not even know they're going down that path. They may be embarrassed. They may feel nothing's going to help. It's just a feeling, but that's their worldview.
Absolutely.
And so we have to go out and talk to them.
And to continue obviously I'm a research nerd as well. But I remember one of the first studies I came into contact here as an extern, I wrote like a newsletter on the study that was working on finding a tentative model of the brain in a suicidal crisis or, in a place of suicidal ideation. And you can literally see it in the scans.
Yeah.
Parts of the brain that help you, notice more positivity. Parts of the brain that are kind of in charge of keeping your self-preservation intact. Those are at a deficit. It's literally the reality that is in front of someone.
And if you have that, there are things you can do to work around it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like if you have learning disabilities, you may never change the learning disability, although with the brain is pretty plastic.
Mm-hmm.
It can change. But even so, it doesn't mean you stop learning. It means you find ways that work. And that's where the flexibility comes in too. We just funded a study. Well, they finished the study. When I say just funded, that means sometimes we really just funded it, but research takes time. And so when we fund a study, it's at least 3 to 5 years before they have completed it and have publications to share that. So it's a long process. And as a researcher, you find you have a big question, but you have to ask it little bits and pieces at a time because you can't look at all of it or you don't know what you found. But we funded a study on an inpatient unit where usually they don't do anything related to suicide. If you come in for a suicide attempt, they just don't. But there's a treatment they developed. It's very brief, and it addresses the suicide and other, helps you think about things and regulate your emotion. And in that very brief intervention, they reduced the rate of subsequent suicide attempts 60%. And they reduced the rate of readmission 70%. Except if you use substances. So if you use alcohol, they still reduce the rate of suicide attempts, but they still had more readmissions. But you have to think about a readmission as a way of taking care of yourself.
Mm-hmm. And the point still remains just addressing and working on an intervention together and figuring out a plan for, when they leave the hospital. It makes a massive difference.
Yeah. Several of our studies look at that. But now we have to get it into clinical hands.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that clinicians don't yet know. And so that's where our advocacy comes in, and our working with health and mental health associations come in to get them to incorporate what we know into what we do. And that too is a big lift. But, our education grew ours and also partnerships and our advocacy department makes a big difference. And anybody can become an advocate. That's what's so cool. Like, you can go to our afsp.org/advocacy. All you have to do is put in your name and address. And then if there's something relevant in your state or federally, you'll get an already written letter that you can add to, because I always like to put my own word in too.
Same.
Every once in a while I get a little tired and I just press submit, but usually I add something. And that's how we got 988. Because hundreds and thousands of people wrote in. Your legislators need to hear from you. Even if they already agree, they have to be able to talk to their peers and say, I got 10,000 emails about this. We have to do this. So that's something every person who is registered to vote can do.
That is sparking in me, like, just trying to, make it neat what we're talking about here in terms of how can suicide be prevented. And, I'm thinking of ecological models and, but we were saying the other day, you can think of it like an onion. There's layers.
Yep.
The top layer, we're thinking policies, which can be barriers or bridges, which will help prevent people from jumping. It can be 988. Firearm. Lethal means restriction. Any means
services
restriction.
For veterans.
Mm-hmm. And then beneath that, you can get to community where the hospital intervention and a plethora of other ones.
Yeah.
And then down to the individual where we're speaking on interventions, we're speaking on people having conversations.
Yeah, it goes at every level. The fancy name for that is the ecological prevention model, where you have public health, community, family, individual. But it just shows that you can intervene at any level, and really intervention at all levels is the most effective for prevention. And so, we're talking about whether or not suicide can be prevented. And the answer is that we do have ways to prevent suicide. And we didn't have them before we had AFSP and we had research. We're not always able to save a life, just like we can't, still 500,000 people die of heart disease, and we know a lot about heart disease, and many people, die from cancer, but we also save lives.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't do that before. That wasn't an option.
So we just went about, 30 minutes on how suicide can be prevented. Let's address the skeptics for a second. Are there people that you think are skeptical of suicide prevention? And like, why would you think that?
I think fewer and fewer people are skeptical because, first of all, we're talking about it, right? Second of all, we're understanding when somebody dies by suicide what some of the factors may have been that contributed to it. But also because, we can't save every person every time. Sometimes we can't. And so we have to accept that. And I think the thought that there's nothing you can do is going away a little bit. Mm-hmm. We still may not be able to do it, but we can try. 94% of people on our Harris poll said that they think that suicide could be prevented, and 90% said they would do something to help prevent it. So not that long ago, it was in the 70% that people thought you could do something to prevent suicide. So with 94%, I don't know what that 6% is doing, but, I think we can help them to understand that at least sometimes we can save a life.
Yeah.
And it's often just a conversation.
And I mean, obviously I'm biased because I work in science communication and research dissemination, but I think a lot of that is just getting the message out.
Well, you are amazing at getting the message out. He does a research roundup. It's 4 new research studies described in plain English, and that's in our Hope Hub, which comes out every month. You have the newsletter, which is a deep dive into a study. You have our carousels at AFSP National on social media, and our TikToks, which are so amazing. He even got me to do a TikTok. But
we're both inadvertent TikTokers. But we'll pop plenty of these resources and things that we do in the show notes.
But how does that work? Like, it works. Like the first TikTok you did, which was on grief, and understanding that even if you're engaging in life and you're not sitting there crying, your brain is still healing. Mm-hmm. You haven't forgotten them. It's important to engage in life while you're grieving. Mm-hmm. And that actually got elevated. So 6.2 million people saw it on its first reveal.
Yeah. I mean, as shocking and horrifying as that was to have 6 million views on a video, it was also probably one of the most meaningful experiences I've ever had, just seeing the level of connection, not only with research, but with, an extension of the research in action, kind of, it's the translation of it.
Also, the lack of research leads to really detrimental things.
Absolutely.
Like, people do things that aren't evidence-based, and a lot of times they're harmful, it turns out. Mm-hmm. So research and education. Wow. So you asked me about people who think, oh, there's nothing you can do. I think it's a really small percent at this time.
I would agree with you.
Yeah.
Are there different approaches that you could speak about to suicide prevention for more underserved and vulnerable communities?
The thing about suicide and suicide prevention is the basics are the basics. But the way you communicate it and the way you apply it, and some special considerations that some people experience that others don't, means that we can understand it mostly the way we understand it across everyone, but we have to adapt that a little bit. We have to understand how a particular group or culture talks about it, and how they talk to each other, the language. There are communities where there's no word for suicide. Mm-hmm. So you can't just go in and start talking about suicide when there's no word for it. So we can do things I kind of believe, once we get to know a community and have people who live in the community help us, we can approach any community. Mm-hmm. But we have to be sensitive. We have to be knowledgeable. We need the voice of people from that community and the voice of people from that community with lived experience to help us talk about it and intervene in a way that's going to be culturally relevant and effective. So, and there are different issues. Think about different cultures. We have a chapter in Alaska and the Native American indigenous population. How they understand it, approach it, deal with it is really different from how, New York City white resident deals with it. But also for the LGBTQ plus community, there's a certain level of understanding and safety when you can talk to somebody who understands, accepts you how you are, and you don't have to explain, which is true for anyone, by the way. When you feel like it's safe and you can be understood without judgment, it's a lot easier. Actually, the 988 is testing out a tribal lifeline.
It's amazing.
Yeah, that's answered by people from tribal communities who understand some of the thinking that's maybe different from, rural America or, again, New York City where we are, It
makes me wonder about like the future. And we talk about gaps in research all the time, but like what areas in suicide prevention do you think we still need further research or improvement?
Well, I think we still need research in the basics because we don't understand everything perfectly, brain function, genetics, aspects of treatment that are helpful and aspects of treatment that actually don't work. But we also need to move to what's called implementation research because we have a bunch of things, but we don't know how to get it out to the public. And so that's an area that we need to take the treatments that we have, take the interventions, and then figure out how to implement them, how to train clinicians and the public in how to use them so they're more widespread. So just like there's a thing called zero suicide, and it's a way a large healthcare system can approach people to reduce suicide across the whole system. And it's like everybody knows about it. Everybody has tools. Everybody knows how to talk about it. The clinics know how to refer and help people. And they reduce suicide rates in the system dramatically.
Teamwork. Yeah.
Teamwork and knowledge. Knowledge is power. And I think that's one of the next steps. Also, the combining of areas. So the combining of genetic information and brain function information and therapy so that we could figure out, we know no treatment works for everybody, but how do we figure out who the treatment is best for? And I think that's going to be another area of research in the future. And I'm just so hopeful because in just a short time, we've come so far. And it feels long, 40 years. I have the amazing privilege of having seen this field develop. Like most people don't get to do that. But 40 years is very short to come from never even considering suicide and thinking it's just a bad word to having treatments and interventions and education programs and all that. So
absolutely.
I'm super, super hopeful about that we're going to get there. Maybe not every person, but more people.
Same.
We can save more people.
Same. Even for my own little slice of privilege in this field of being here for 6 years, we see it every year in terms of these gaps being addressed with when we open our application cycle, you can kind of see these different parts, like even of the onion almost that we mentioned, reaching towards each other in these applications of like right now we're seeing tons of implementation applications because they're reacting. So we have a lot of direct access for reasons for being hopeful.
Yes.
Which is such a great thing, The
other thing is, so we have our International Summit for Suicide Research coming up in Boston, which is for researchers. Like I think there are over 550 researchers registered, and bringing them together to talk about what they're doing, to share the science. And plus I run around introducing people who might work well together because but being there, talking about it, learning about what's new in the field, it also advances the science. Those conferences, those conferences are really important. And then we really work on bringing early career researchers in because what good is it if it's just us old fuddy-duddies? So we have our own early career research programs, but we also have the Suicide Research Symposium, which is free. and virtual in April. Anybody can sign up, and hundreds of presentations. So, one of our roles in our strategic plan is to build a researcher community. And so we went from that maybe 10 people. We have 260 expert advisors now?
More, yeah.
Yeah, and our early career researchers are now mentors to other early career researchers. That gives me huge hope for the field.
We're seeing the direct growth of the field. It's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. With all this in mind, though, what do you hope to see in the future in the field of suicide prevention? Like, what's one amazing thing you would love to see happen?
I would like to see people getting help. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I would like to see us reaching even the 13 million, but we'll go with the 1 million or the 49,000 who did die by suicide. I would like to see them getting help using evidence-based treatments and interventions. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of volunteers who also, they'll say their lives are saved by working with us. And that just, means the world to me, because to me, it's really about the person. I know I'm a science geek and I know I turn everything into that stuff, but honestly, it's the possibility of saving lives and making us better at that. That really gets to me.
That's the beauty of this work that I see specifically in this field, is that it is the perfect marriage between, and you're a great embodiment of this, of rigor and compassion. And it's where those two things meet that magic really happens and lives can be saved.
Well, my 4 words: compassion, respect, patience, and persistence. And I try, those are my guiding principles, but I try my best anyway.
All right. Well, I'm going to challenge you. So to sum things up, because I know, even in our working together, we sometimes will lovingly battle over certain words and the economy of words. But my challenge would be to sum things up. And I know it's a complex answer, and I know suicide is complex, but to put a bow on this, can suicide actually be prevented?
I think we could do some things to prevent suicide. I can't, for respect out of people who've lost someone, I can't say we could prevent every suicide. But yes, we can prevent suicide for some people, many people. And I hope that the rate has been stabilizing over the past few years. And I hope that that's because of some things we're doing. We can save lives. I have no doubt about that.
My last little addition to that would be, one of the first things I read when I started working here was suicide is more a sign of pain than it is a wish for death.
Yep.
And I think addressing that pain is my answer to that question.
Yeah.
Yes, it can be prevented.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris, for joining me on Ask Dr. Jill.
Jill, it was the best. It was a pleasure.
You were great. And for our audience, if you have a question related to mental health or suicide prevention, please submit it by following the link in the show notes, and you may have it answered on the show. If you're not familiar, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or AFSP, is America's leading suicide prevention organization and the largest private funder of suicide prevention research, with local chapters in all 50 states, D.C., and Puerto Rico. AFSP offers education, loss support, and advocacy programs and events nationwide, including our Out of the Darkness walks. You can learn more about AFSP at afsp.org. And if you or anyone you know is in crisis, call or text 988 for free, 24/7, to reach the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.